we're gonna be jumping around, we're gonna be skipping around, so keep track of what we're learning. And of course, like the Rebbe's approach always is, that if Purim has to be happy, so then after Purim, especially Shushan Purim, even more so. And the Rebbe is going to explain all types of ways and reasonings and so on. But there's a lot to get into, so I'm going to skip around a little bit. So we're going to start on the first page of the Farbrengen of the Simcha. We're going to skip over to the fourth paragraph. When it gets to Shushan Purim, aber wird gebracht in Halacha concerning Shushan Purim, it's actually brought down in Halacha in Shulchan Aruch, as demot dav zayin derin Simcha, there has to be joy on Shushan Purim. That's also the reason why we do not recite Tachnun on Shushan Purim. Und afal pi as bnei ayoris pravim Purim ba Yudalad, though the regular towns, people that don't live in the walled cities like Yerushalayim, etc., do celebrate Purim on the 14th of Adar, not on the 15th of Adar. Only people living in walled cities, like people in the old city of Yerushalayim, they celebrate Purim on the 15th of the month. So seemingly, what relevance does the Shushan Purim have to the majority of us that don't live and are not celebrating in a walled city? So the Rebbe says, Afal Pikein, despite that, is al pi halacha oich by bnei ayoris darf zayin atois v'simcha oich betesvav ba'adar and Shushan Purim. Still in all, even according to halacha, by people that live in open cities, there has to be an additional joy also in the 15th of Adar, which is Shushan Purim. Let's skip to a paragraph over to Eis Beis. Heinte Kertag, this very day, wird angerufen Shushan Purim. It's called Shushan Purim. Was davon ist verstandig, als es darf heint sein as Simcha Shalamaylo Didavagbola. From this, that we're calling it Shushan of Purim, that it's understood that today has to be a joy beyond measure and boundary. The Simcha from Purim is a Simcha Adolayada. The joy of Purim is a joy until he does not know, meaning Lamaylam Abdida Vagbola, beyond any measure and boundary. The Simcha from Moedim La Simcha, as opposed to the joy of the Yomim Tovim that are given for joy, but the Simcha from Moedim La Simcha, because the joy of Yomim Tovim that are established for joy is a Simcha B'Hagbol. We'll skip over the next line. Chayv and Bezdin, Laham Mit Shoitrim Bergolim. The Bezdin are obligated to place officers in charge in the Yom Tovim Tzezen, as the Simcha Zol Zayin Didav Hagbol, that the Simcha should be under control. Was euch der etzem Wort Din, from the word Bezdin, the very word Din is judgment, limitation, constriction. Weiß gleich, as is an Inyan, was is kosher Didav Hagbol. It already indicates that something has to do with a measure and a boundary. Mashenkin by Purim gefindt nit der Inyan von Chayavin Bezdin Lahamid Shoitrim. We do not find that in Purim that Bezdin is obligated and needs to place officers in charge. From the Simcha from Purim is a Simcha Adolayada, because the joy of Purim is a joy until we do not know, we do not have any differentiation and any types of distinction, Lamailam Didavagbola, beyond any type of measure and boundary. Und wie bald as Heintke Tag wird angerufen Shushan Purim, since today's day is called Shushan Purim. Euch in the Ayoras HaProzis, even in open cities where we don't actually do the mitzvahs of Purim, was Shmoy Asher Yikr Lev Lashon HaKodesh weist of the Eiches HaDover, the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that the name that something is called shows on the quality of that particular thing. So therefore, it's a day that has to do with Purim. It's called Shushan Purim. Is verstandig, so it's understood, as in Yonoi, von Heint Kitog, Euch in Ayoras HaProzis, the idea of today's day, even in open cities where we do not actually have the mitzvahs of Purim, is Adol Yada. It's still, today, we still have to be in such a way that we do not know Lamailum Didav Agbola, beyond any types of measures and boundaries. We're going to skip over to the next page. Ois Gimel, which is 3 paragraphs on the bottom. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Ois Daled, 4 paragraphs on the bottom of the page? 3 paragraphs on the bottom of the page. Al pi anal, according to the above, as in Heintgetag kommen sich zusammen die beide Inyanim, der Inyan von Shushan Purim, was heißt der Tag in Teures Emes, that comes together 2 ideas. He was talking about also the idea of Shabbos. We're not going to get into that. The idea of Shushan Purim, that this is how it's called in the Torah of Truth. Was in Yone is Ad Lo Yadol Mailam Didav Agbola. That it's idea that's beyond knowledge, beyond measure and boundary. Skip over to the next paragraph, second paragraph from the bottom. Is verstandig as in Yone from dem Tag is, it's understood that the concept of this day is Lamailam Didav Agbola, beyond measure and boundary. Und die alle Heuroes v'achlotes von dem Tag darfen sein an Eufen von Lamailam Didav Agbola, and all the lessons and all the resolutions of this particular day has to be in a way of beyond measure and boundary. The Rebbe concludes the last 2 lines, V'amaiso ikir, action is what's primary, as darv zayin, Ahirof in Shushan Purim b'negel lamaisa poil, there has to be a directive and a lesson of Shushan Purim concerning action, ubehagdim, and by prefacing them inyan from Shushan Purim biyachas to Purim, how the idea of Shushan Purim relates to Purim. V'lechure seemingly is in ganz nicht verstandig, it's totally not understood in was besteht the avoida from Shushan Purim. What type of divine service does Shushan Purim entail? Shushan Purim is a tag nach Purim. Shushan Purim is a day following Purim. V'lechura seemingly the Purim halter shine in Tachsa Shleimus, and Purim is already at the ultimate height. Is via Shayach as it all oil sein by Vidosim in Shushan Purim. How is it possible that he should rise up in his service on Shushan Purim? He's already reached the heights of everything. Purim is like in Yone Ka'amur Ad Lo Yoda Avodah L'Mailam Didav Agbola. Purim is like the concept, like we mentioned before, to reach a state where he does not even higher than knowledge, higher than understanding. An avodah, a service that's beyond measure and boundary. Und sicher hat jeder getan be Purim avodah b'shleimus. And surely everybody did on Purim his avodah completely. Und hat getan avodah in anoifen von Ad Lo Yoda L'Mailam Didav Agbola. And surely he did his service in such a way of beyond knowing, beyond measure and boundary. Beyond measure and boundary. Und es ist nicht der Pshat, als halt bei der Ad Lo Yoda. Der Fahr, was hat nicht kein Yidiyim, as in dem besteht an Ad Lo Yoda, doesn't mean that he has no knowledge because he's ignorant. he's reached a stage of ignorance. No. Adrab, hat a Yidiyah Tzuma. He knows a lot. Und hat Havana Vasoge, and he has understanding and he has comprehension. Warum bei Purim is doch la Yehudim Haisa Eure, because on Purim, to the Jewish people it was light, was Eure zu Teure. As we know, light, the Chazal say, refers to Teure, like it says Teure Eure. Kiner mitzvah v'Teure Eure. Hat doch Teure. And what type of Torah, and he has Torah. And was for a Torah, what type of level of Torah? Torah is givorn lachri agzeira, a Torah the way it was after the decree of Haman was removed. Was demol that then, once we pass through the decree, durch dem gzeira, through the decree, is Torah givorn ki yisten oirmen achoshech, so then the Torah was in such a way that the additional light that comes out of the darkness, so therefore the Torah was even more powerful, mit dem ganzen Sturm, with a whole tumult about it. So therefore, but Purim hat Torah in an oifen Naila. Purim surely has Torah in an utmost highest and lofty way. When Afal became still null, halter by Ad Lo Yoda, he's still holding by Ad Lo Yoda. Why? Why is he Ad Lo Yoda? Not because he's lacking knowledge, but he's transcending the knowledge. He's holding beyond measure and boundary. Even the measures and boundaries of such a powerful knowledge and such an elevated level in knowledge of Torah. So therefore, seemingly, he's in the ultimate perfection of his service. is was is inyan avidose b'Shushan Purim atog nach Purim. So what can he more do? What can be still in his service a day following Purim? Us is nit pshat as b'Shushan Purim darf Tage bleiben bei dem was gehalten Purim. It doesn't mean that on Shushan Purim he still has to hold by whatever he was holding by on Purim. Mizagt as b'Shushan Purim darf Tage oile sein. When it comes to Shushan Purim, he has to rise higher. Because when it comes to holiness, one has to rise and increase. And like we said, Shushan Purim is also the idea of Shushan Purim is to go beyond measure and boundary. Das heißt, as b'Shushan Purim darf oilo sein avoidel l'maylam didvak that in Shushan Purim he has to rise in his service beyond measure and boundary. So the Rebbe says, "V'lchura seemingly showing bepurim and tachsa shleimus avoida halter in tachsa shleimus avoida adlo yadol mailam didvak bol already on Purim he already had avoida beyond measure and boundary adlo yadam." Was the bir bezed explanation, and this is vi can ataka oil zayin. How can he rise up in his service on Shushan Purim? Mailim bekodesh, he has to rise up in holiness. Mit sein verstandig behagdim dem inyan from welchen Shushan Purim is herausgekommen. This will be understood by first prefacing, how did Shushan Purim even come about? It's a very interesting point that Rebbe is going to say. Shushan Purim was not something that came about initially at a Chashverish perspective. This came about from Esther's perspective, which is the idea of the Jewish people. Like it's related in the Megillah in the simple sense. Also, what took place in the Megillah, there's a similar question. As Vert erzählt in the Megillah, it relates in the story. It's related in the Megillah. As biyud gimel ba'adar shengevan der nikolu v'named al nafsham, on the 13th of Adar, the Jewish people gathered and they stood on for their lives. They stood to fight the war. On Haraga Yehudim b'Seineim va'aved, that the Jewish people killed and destroyed their enemies. Damot haben Yidden schon gemacht der Bitla Metzias von Seineim. That then the Jewish people already created that the nullification of the existence of their enemies. So the Rebbe says the spiritual concept of this is how does one negate the existence of their enemies? It's logical as das is durch dem was mis frier mevatelt eigene Metzias, that it's by first nullifying our own being, having our own bittul. Is as alainism bittul Metzias, if we ourselves are in a state of nullifying ourselves and sublimating ourselves to Hashem, bechinas adaloyada, in a way that you're reaching beyond knowledge and understanding, then you could be mevatel the Metzias of the enemies. Was the fun kommt when this comes out, as shown by Yud Gimel Ba'adar, that already on the 13th of Adar, and in actuality it came out in the 14th of Adar, the Purim Atzmai, on the day of Purim itself, hat man gehalten, we're already holding by the Adaloyada, by a state that they were beyond knowledge. The Nach is given. After that, what took place? Vayomar HaMelech Esther HaMalcha, and the king told Esther the queen, after that time when he killed them out, when they killed out the enemies throughout the 127 countries, so the king asked Esther, what's your request? And it will be given you. What else do you ask? And it will be done. And Esther said, if this is something that pleases the king, that tomorrow also the Jews that are in Shushan should be able to do, like the law gave them permission to do today, to destroy their enemies, they should be able to do the same thing in Shushan the day after. Was in Megillas Esther, that in Megillus Esther, skip the parentheses, Gate der Teuer HaMelech Eif Malka Shaloilum. We know wherever it says HaMelech, the king, it's referring to the king of the world, Melech Malka Amlach HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kedrash Chazal, like Chazal say, the king of kings Hashem. Kumtois, what does this mean? As noch dem Vididen halten schon bei Adelo Yoda, after the Jews were already holding by Adelo Yoda. They were beyond the level of understanding. Was das schon gewesen, Yud Gimel, but Yudal Oder, this already took place on the 13th and 14th of Adar Canal, like we said before. Fregt ze Malke Shaloilam Melech Malchem Lachwaj Baruch. The king of the world, the king of kings Hashem, asked them, Was will ze ton weiter in Avodas Hashem? What do they want to do further in the service of Hashem? Und Esther, was Knesset Yisrael wird angerufen, B'Shem Esther, the whole entire Jewish people is called Esther, and for B'Shem called Knesset Yisrael. She responds in the name of all the Jewish people, as la Yehudim asher b'Shushan, that to the Jewish people that are in Shushan, is the far was a gefinnen sich in Shushan ira bira, because they find themselves in Shushan, the capital, in an ir hamukefes chayma, in a city that's surrounded by a wall. Was in Yana Ruchnius is vani eyela chaymas eish saviv, that the spiritual idea of it is that Hashem says, I will be for the Jewish people a wall of fire around them. As the Reibishter is arum dem ir achaymes eish, not just to Jewish people, to the city of Yerushalayim, I will be for the city of Yerushalayim a wall of fire. So Esther, the Jewish people, asked from Hashem, Zolman ze geben lasis kedos hayoim. Let them be given to be done like today. The Jewish people are asking Hashem, give us another avodah, give us some more that we should be able to do this. And through this inspiration from below, that the Jewish people asked this by Hashem, haben sie azoi gepoiled by the Melech, so they influenced and affected the king, in other words Hashem, as it's also geben, noch atah gamocher lasses kedos hayoim, that I should give them another day, also tomorrow, in other words, which was the day of Shushan Purim, lasses kedos hayoim, to do like Purim. Was durch them is aroitzi kumen der inyan from Shushan Purim. Through this came about the idea of Shushan Purim. Okay, we're going to skip over a little bit to Ois Ches. No, I'm sorry, it was page Ches. To Ois Yud Beis. Yud Beis is 5 paragraphs on the bottom of the page. Unal Pi Anal. And according to what the Rebbe spoke about previous, the part that we skipped, as the Lamailom Didavag Bola from Shushan Purim is Hecher, with the Lamailom Didavag Bola from Purim, that going out of the measures and boundaries of Shushan Purim is even higher than going out and beyond the measures and boundaries of Purim. A Hecher Dargim B'chol Moedecha, it's a higher level in what the Rebbe spoke about over there with all your might. Is verstandig, as azoi is as oich be'inyan ha-simcha. It's understood this is also concerning joy. As b'Shushan Purim dav zayin ha-simcha ado lo yodo l'maylam didag bol. Shushan Purim has to be a joy until he does not know, beyond measure and boundary. Nailis yoiser oich from the simcha from Purim, even higher than the joy of Purim. Was azoi darf zayin b'chol shana v'shana. So it has to be in every single year. Var Megillus Esther is Hayra Nitzchas Chol Adoros, because Megillus Esther is an everlasting lesson for all the generations. Let's skip over to the next page. Second paragraph from the top. There's a question mark over there. I don't know why. Es is mevur on L'Kutei Torah b'inyan ha'akafos sheb'shmini atzeres. It's explained in L'Kutei Torah concerning the hakafos that we do on Shmini Atzeres, and so too in Simchas Torah in Chutz La'aretz. Sheloi nichtevu afilu b'Torah shebal peh ve'eino ela minig. It's not written anywhere, even in the oral Torah. We don't find in Gemara, which is the source for all of our halachas, we don't find any mention of hakafas. It's only a minig that's brought down in Shulchan Aruch. So the Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah explains as saying da in Yonim was ein mefurish betorish b'ksav behedya. There are ideas, topics, halachas that are explicitly written in the written Torah. Und das sein da hechere in Yonim. Then there are higher matters. Was eine nit mefurish bekra betorish b'ksav rak der Rabbanon samchu akroi. In Torah Shebeksav stehen sie managed wie Beremes. In the written Torah, they're only written in a hinted way. Und Torah Shebapel learns a yapet, and the oral Torah derives it from different psukim and so on. Skip to the end of the parentheses. And then the Alter Rebbe says a third level. Und as ein don noch hecher in Yanim was kann nicht stehen in Torah Bechlal. There's even higher things that cannot even be written in Torah at all. Even in the oral Torah was das Zanim and Hagim, these are customs. Was al derech says that in von hakafes mit mir hatzeres zum Torah. Similarly, the hakafes and shmini hatzeres zum Torah. As das was is ein nor a minig, the fact that they're only a custom is dass der Far was sei sein an Indien Naile beyoiser was kann sich nicht reinpassen a film in the Medida von Torah. If there's such a lofty thing that they cannot fit in even in the boundaries and the measures of Torah. Let's skip over to Yudalid. Was al derech amar leil benegiat zu den hakafes b'shmini atzeres was Torah in a similar vein to what it says concerning hakafes and shmini atzeres was Torah. Kann man sagen euch benegehe zu the Simcha von Shushan Purim. We could say also concerning the joy of Shushan Purim, and the Rebbe connects Shushan Purim or Purim in general with Simchas Torah. Warum Purim and Simchas Torah, he says in the brackets, seien doch verbunden ze beze. Purim and Simchas Torah are connected with each other. Al derech wie be Simchas Torah is Gemara Shal Torah. Just like Simchas Torah, we are celebrating the conclusion of the Torah because we finished reading the entire Chamish Chumshi Torah, the 5 books of Moses. Al derech says euch Purim in Yana Shal Gemara Shal Torah. Purim is also like the conclusion of the Torah, but not the conclusion of the reading of the Torah, but in a different type of conclusion. That Varum Purim is given v'kibla Yehudim esrechelu lasis, and Purim was that the Jewish people accepted what they began to do. Demot is given der Gemar from Torah shekiblu kvar mesinai. Then it was the conclusion and the completion of the Torah they accepted already on Har Sinai. That the Baruch Zal explained that then they really fully accepted it because by Har Sinai the mountain was held over their head, and here they accepted it on their own. As the Simcha ad lo yoda from Shushan Purim is Naila ad kedei kach, the joy of ad lo yoda of Shushan Purim is so high, just like the Hakafis that doesn't say in Torah Shabbat Peh, the same thing. As das is an Inyan was can nit stehen befehlish. The joy of Shushan Purim cannot be written explicitly. In other words, a joy that's ad lo yada. We said it says in Shulchan Aruch about being joyous on Shushan Purim, but it doesn't say to be joyous ad lo yada beyond reason, beyond rational understanding. Der Inyan von Simcha ad lo yada b'yudal b'Purim steht befehlish. When it comes to rejoicing beyond knowledge on the 14th of Adar, on the day of Purim itself, that says open. In the Inyan von ad lo yada b'tesvav b'Shushan Purim, as opposed to reaching a state of beyond knowledge and understanding on the 15th on Shushan Purim. Steht nicht befehlish, it doesn't say explicitly. Warum der ad lo yada von Shushan Purim is naile yoiser ad kedei kach, because this type of beyond knowledge of Shushan Purim is so elevated as das kann sich nicht reinpassen euch in der Medida. It cannot even fit in to this type of measure. Weil derech wie der Inyan von Hakafes und Shmini Atzeres was Torah v'kiyoytze bezeh. Similar to the idea of Hakafes and Shmini Atzeres was Torah, and similar to that it's not written in Torah Shebaal Peh. And the Rebbe keeps on continuing the association, and now from understanding this, to go back to understanding about Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah. So he says in Ois Tesvav, third paragraph, third line, V'yesh loimer, it says, Meken al pisa mevar zayin oich li'idach, an inyan the Simcha of Simchas Torah. According to this, we could also explain the other side, also something about the joy of Simchas Torah. V'balt as the Simcha of Simchas Torah is bedugmas the Adol Yoda from Purim, since the joy of Simchas Torah is similar to the Adol Yoda of Purim, der Fahr seinen Tage demot nitode medidas vagbolos sein gewend the Simcha from Moedem Simchas Stam. Therefore, on Simchas Torah there were no limitations that were in the joy of the general level of Yom Tov have to be for joy. Afilu hecher vidas is besugos hagam besukos most probably supposed to say hagam azech Simchas Torah in the Moedem Simcha even higher than the way it was on Sukkos, even though Simchas Torah is also from the Moedem Simcha. Uvimizet, as the minig Yisrael is, like we see that the actual custom how Jews act is as demot is da ribuy simcha, that in Simchas Torah there's a lot of joy. Und demot is matter kamin yon sein given also a ganz year. Then we permit many things that are prohibited a whole year. V'ladugma der minig laharbes akrin l'sefer Torah, for example, like the custom to add many people to read from the Sefer Torah. Und in Yonim Moich the Kriya Atzman, also things that we add to the reading of the Torah. Was das alt is der Far, was damals is the Simcha L'maylam Didavag Bolo. Why is this all happening on Simchas Torah? Because the joy on Simchas Torah is beyond measure and boundary completely. L'mayla oich from the Medidavag Bolo from Torah, beyond even the limitations of Torah. Bedugmas der Adol Yoda from Shushan Purim, similar to the level of beyond understanding of Shushan Purim. So the Rebbe goes on nice to Zayin. Va'afal pi as the Simcha from Simchas Torah is Nihilus Yoser from the Simcha from Moedem Simchas Stam. Though the joy of Simchas Torah is even higher than the ordinary joy of Yom Tov, unzi is bedugmas dem Adol Yoda from Shushan Purim, and it's similar to the Adol Yoda of Shushan Purim. Afal Pikain, still in all, is the Simcha from Purim fort a Simcha Nihilus Yoser. The Simcha of Purim is greater ubemyucha der inyan for Shushan Purim, and specifically the idea of Shushan Purim. It's an amazing concept. The Rebbe says, Purim is greater than Simchas Torah, higher than Simchas Torah, and more than that, Shushan Purim is even greater than Simchas Torah. Wie mezet es euch von dem Chiluk HaMekayos of the Simchas von Simchas Torah and from Shushan Purim. Like we see also by looking at the differences between the sources for being joyous on Simchas Torah versus being joyous on Shushan Purim. Afal pi as der in HaKofes b'Simchas Torah is nit kenin v'shteit in Torah shb'ksav, though HaKofes on Simchas Torah is not written in the written Torah, and Oich nit in Torah Shbapeh, it's not even written in the oral Torah. Es is nor a minig, it's only a custom. Afal pikein, vert es azoi abgepasst in Shulchan Aruch and Ramah. It's still ruled that way in the glosses of the Ramah on the Shulchan Aruch and Rabbi Yosef Karo. Ubemele, if the roof is chal that tzivui al pi ha-Torah she'eruch ha-goymer tasel lo'isasar v'goymer, so therefore it applies the command that it says that according to the Torah they will teach you, you shall do and not turn away. You shall ask your father. There is both a positive commandment to listen to what the sages said and a negative commandment to not listen to what the sages say. In other words, that's a negative commandment to disregard what the sages state. So therefore, once it says it in Shulchan Aruch, even though it's a custom, it has a certain type of strength and force, which we're going to say Shushan Purim doesn't have. And that itself indicates that Shushan Purim is higher. As opposed to the joy of Adla Yoda and Shushan Purim, can sich nicht reinpassen, na viele nicht in der Medida Wagbolle, cannot even fit into this measure and boundary. Was the far gefindt man nicht, als soll stehen befehlisch the minion von Adla Yoda b'Shushan Purim. That's why we do not find that it says explicitly the idea of Adla Yoda in Shushan Purim. Der Adla Yoda from Shushan Purim is naila kol kach. Der Adla Yoda, going beyond knowledge of Shushan Purim, is so lofty, as it can sich nicht reinpassen, na viele im Medida Wagbolle, in welcher der Hakafes von Simchas Torah stellt sich herein. Even in the ones that the Hakafes of Simchas Torah is inserted in. So we're going to skip down to Ois. We're going to skip down to let's skip down to Ois Yud Ches, 3 paragraphs on the bottom. Was al pi kol ze is moving den Geudler ilu in dem Lamailam didavag bolu from the Heid Ketog. According to all the above, it's understood the great advantage and the beyond measure and boundary of today's day. Simon Sad the Roifas is Shabbos, both because this Farbrengen was being said on Shabbos, and Simon Sad the Roifas is Shushan Purim, also because it is Shushan Purim. Let's skip over to the last line on the page. Was das der in for Shushan Purim? That's the idea of Shushan Purim. Was is kosher mit Shushan Abira, that's connected with Shushan the capital. Oops, got to turn the page. So the Rebbe asks in Yud Tes, L'chure kann doch teinen, seemingly, he could say, what does he have to do with Shushan Abira? Das ist all shaykh zu einem, was gefindt sich in Shushan Abira. This only applies to someone that's in Shushan Abira. Gefindt sich nicht in Shushan Abira. The Jew says, I'm not found in Shushan Abira. Gefindt sich in an Ir, in Krach. I find myself in an open city, not in a walled city. Und I feel nicht in the area pros of Eretz Yisrael. I'm not even in an open city of Eretz Yisrael. Gefindt sich in Chutz La'aretz. I find myself outside of Eretz Yisrael. Is wie meint man von them, der Avoida Nal B'Shasser sitzen an ihren Golos, how do they ask of him such a type of service when he's sitting in the city and exiled? Is the beer in them, the explanation of this is, Al Pi an Inyan was me gefind Garbe Pashtas, according to a matter we find in the most simple sense, was mechabt sich nicht auf dem Karagel. The Rebbe says, as usual, the most simplest things people don't even realize. Jeder Yid sagt b'chol Motzei Shabbos. Every Jew says on every Motzei Shabbos, when geht aviber mishabbos lachoil, when he's transferring and he's transitioning from Shabbos to the weekday, he says in Havdalah, La Yehudim hoisa oira v'simcha v'kar, to the Jewish people was light and joy and happiness and glory, and in the Havdalah they add words that don't say in the Megillah. That quote is in the Megillah, but the Havdalah, it says 3 more words. Kain tialanu. So, in the exact same way, how they had it, it should be for us. Was mishas mezakt kain tialanu, when we say, this is how it should be for us, like this it should be for us, is the pshat, the meaning is, as is amol gewendem inyan, that once upon a time this happened, und kain, azoy vis gewen amol tialanu. The same way how it was once upon a time, that's how it should be to us. Wo ist das gewen amol? When did this take place? Is das, was steht in Megillah, la Yehudim hoisa oirav simcha v'sas. It's what it says in the Megillah. That was the once upon a time that it happened, that it says the Jewish people had light and joy and happiness and glory. Was al pi pshuter shel mikra, in the simple sense, which Jews is it talking about? Geht doch the pasuk of the Yehudim was ein Gewinn b'Shushan. The pasuk is a continuation to what it says previous to it, and over there it's talking specifically about the Jewish people in Shushan. Wie es steht gleich vor dem pasuk, like it says, the pasuk immediately before this pasuk. It says, Va'ir Shushan tzalav v'samecha. It says, the city of Shushan was rejoicing. Und gleich is the pasuk mamshech, and immediately the pasuk continues. The Jewish people was light and joy and happiness and glory. Und erst danach, and only afterwards, in the other pasuk, in a different pasuk, steht b'chol medina v'chol ir v'ir v'goymer simcha v'sason la Yehudim. Then it talks about all the other countries. Then it talks about the 127 countries, in every city, in every country. Joy and happiness was for the Jewish people. But, so in other words, what does that mean? That the earlier pasuk, like Hudim Haisa Erev Simcha Sas Mikar, is was von dem ist verstandig, von ist understood, as in the pasuk Shalifne is a Retzach wegen Shushan Abira. The pasuk prior to this talking in Shushan Abira. And even though it's talking about Shushan Abira, Zok Yeder Yid B'chol Motzei Shabbos. Every Jew says every Motzei Shabbos, Kein Tielanu. So it should be for us. As Azoivis is given b'Shushan Abira, just like it was in Shushan, the capital, Zol Oich Zayin by uns, should also be by us. Hagam must be gefindt sich nit in Shushan Abira, though we don't find ourselves in Shushan Abira. So the Rebbe concludes, was al derech says as euch beneget to the avoida hamura li'il mit Shushan Purim. So too, it's concerning the above-mentioned service connected with Shushan Purim, the avoida from Simcha Adola Yada, the avoida of joy going beyond knowledge. L'mayla yoyser euch from the avoida from Purim, even higher than the service of Purim. As das is shayech to Yedrin. It's applicable to everyone. Wherever he finds themselves, they can still have the joy and the gladness on Shushan Purim. Experience the joy of Shushan Purim, even though I'm not in Shushan Abira.